March 1922. A farm in Bavaria. One house, one forest, and a mystery nobody solved. This place was called Hinterkaifeck. It sat alone outside a tiny village. No close neighbors, no easy road in. Just cold fields and trees. And then the signs started. Footprints in the snow. They came from the woods. They went straight to the house, but they never came back out. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The owner, Andreas Gruber, noticed it. He also heard strange noises from the attic at night, inside his own house. Then came the other signs. A newspaper no one had bought. A key missing. A tool moved. A door that seemed to open on its own. Small things, but together, they made no sense. The family still tried to keep living there. That is what makes this story so hard to take. They kept feeding the animals, kept working, kept sleeping in the house, even while something felt off. Days passed. Then the neighbors stopped seeing them. No one came to the gate. No one answered calls. The farm went quiet in a way people noticed. So a neighbor finally went over. What he found changed everything. The barn was still there. The animals were still fed. But the family was gone. The house had been left in a rush. Food sat out. Doors were open. And inside, the silence felt wrong. Then they searched deeper. One by one, the bodies were found. Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their daughter Victoria, her two children, 7-year-old Kazilia and little Joseph, and the maid, Maria Baumgartner, 6 dead, all on the same farm. The details were brutal. The attack happened close to home. Very close. The victims were found in different parts of the property, as if the killer had moved through the place with time to spare. That part matters, because this was not just a hit-and-run crime. Someone stayed there. Someone knew the farm well enough to move around it. Someone may have lived there after the killings, sleeping in the same rooms, using the same stove, hearing the same wind outside. And that idea still unsettles people. The police came. They searched the house. They questioned neighbors. They looked for a motive. Robbery was ruled weak. A family fight did not fit either. Rumors spread fast. So did suspicion. Some people pointed at Andreas, others at his own past. Some blamed a broken family. Some blamed a stranger from the woods. No theory held up. Then there was the case of the footprints. Those tracks in the snow, leading in, never leading out. That detail has haunted this case for 100 years because it suggests something simple and awful. Whoever came to the farm may have already been waiting nearby. Or maybe they never really left at all. Investigators also found signs that someone had been using the house after the deaths. Food had been taken. The stove had been used. That is one of the darkest parts of the story. Not just the killings, the staying. Think about that. A quiet farm, a dead family, and someone still inside. The mystery only grew with time. Witness statements changed. Leads died out. Suspects came and went. No confession. No clean answer. No final name. And that is why Hinterkaifeck still gets talked about today. Not because it was loud. Not because it was famous at the time. Because it was so lonely. One farm. One forest. One family. And a killer who vanished without a trace. More than a century later, people still ask the same question. Who was there on that farm? And why did they stay? Weeks before the murders, the signs were already there. Andreas Gruber noticed the snow first. Fresh footprints coming out of the forest, straight to the farmhouse. But there were no tracks going back. None. Whoever came here was not walking away. At first, people probably tried to explain it away. A neighbor, a visitor, someone passing through. But the prints kept showing up. The same path, the same direction. Forest to house, house to nowhere. Then the house started making noise. Not the normal kind, not the creaks you get from cold weather. These were footsteps above them. Movement in the attic, heavy enough to hear. Clear enough to make the family stop and listen. It felt like someone was inside the roof, as though someone was hiding inside the house. Then another strange discovery appeared. A newspaper no one recognized. No one knew who brought it there. No one could explain why it was there at all. Then, keys started going missing. Simple things, small things, the kind of details people ignore until they become impossible to ignore. And then, there was the maid. One former maid reportedly quit because she believed the property was haunted. That was the word she used. Haunted. Not dangerous, not suspicious. And if someone working in that house felt enough fear to walk away, that says a lot. But here's the part that makes it worse. At the time, none of this looked connected. A few odd noises, missing keys, a strange newspaper, footprints in the snow. On their own, they sound like little problems. Weird, but manageable. Nothing that screams what was coming next. That's what makes it so unsettling. The signs were there. They just did not look like signs yet. After the murders, every detail changed. The footprints were no longer just footprints. The attic noises were no longer just noises. The missing keys stopped being a small inconvenience. Everything started to point in the same direction. Someone had been close, very close, maybe already inside, and the farm itself started to feel different. Not because it changed, because everyone now knew what had happened there. The silence, once normal, became heavy. The snow, once plain, became part of the story. Even the forest behind the house seemed to mean something else. That's the trouble with warning signs. Most of the time, they look harmless while they're happening. You hear a sound. You see a track. You lose a key. You tell yourself, it's nothing. Until later. Then you remember every small detail, every odd moment, everything you brushed off, and you realize the worst part was never the crime itself. It was how many times the house tried to warn them first, and no one knew what they were hearing. No one knew who was coming. No one knew that the footsteps in the snow, the movement in the attic, and the missing keys all belonged to the same dark story. By the time anyone understood, it was already too late. March 31st, 1922. Something goes wrong at Hinterkaifeck. Not a little thing. Everything. The night starts normal. Cold air. Farm noise. Family inside. Then the barn door opens. Or maybe it was already open. Nobody knows for sure. What investigators think happened is simple. One person went out first, then another, then another. They were pulled away from the house, one at a time. No big fight, no warning, just gone into the dark. And inside that barn, the killings begin. Andreas Gruber, his wife, their daughter, 2 children, one by one, close up, fast enough that the others never had time to run, never had time to call out. The kind of violence that leaves no room for mercy. Then there is the new maid. She had just joined the farm. She also dies that night. That part matters. It means the killer stayed long enough to wait, long enough to make sure nobody walked away. But here is the part that still makes no sense. Neighbors were close enough to matter, close enough to hear something, and yet nobody reported screams. Nobody said they saw a stranger running through the fields. Nobody came forward with the one detail that could have cracked the case. The farm just goes quiet. That silence becomes its own clue, because it does not feel empty. It feels managed, like someone stayed after the murders, like someone fed the animals, like someone moved through the house, like someone was not in a hurry to leave. That is what makes Hinterkaifeck worse than a normal crime. It was not just the killing. It was the time after. The hours when the murderer was still there, living inside the same walls, walking the same floorboards, listening to the same wind outside. The next morning should have been different. Someone should have noticed smoke, movement, voices. But the farm sits there, still. Wrong. For days, the family is missed, but not checked on right away. People assume they are busy. Private, rural life lets small delays happen. Then someone finally looks closer, and the house answers back with death. What they find is a scene that breaks the case wide open, but not in the way anyone wants. The bodies are there. The crime is real. The killer is not. No clean witness, no clear motive, no straightforward suspect. Just a farm that turned into a grave. The brutality points to rage, or maybe panic, or maybe something even stranger. Because whoever did this was not just violent. They were comfortable enough to remain nearby afterward. That detail changes everything. It suggests planning, or confidence, or a mind that no longer cared about being caught. And then there is the problem investigators can never solve. Why this family? Why that night? Why the barn? Why the silence? Every answer makes the story colder, not clearer. People still argue about the order of events, about whether someone was tricked outside, about whether the killer knew the house well, about whether the threat came from outside the farm or from inside it. But the truth never lands cleanly. It stays broken apart. That is why Hinterkaifeck still gets under people's skin. Not because it was loud, because it was quiet, because a whole family disappears in a place where someone should have heard something, because the killer does not just strike, they linger. And when the night ends, the farm is still standing. The lanterns are out, the doors are shut, the animals are alive, the people are not. That silence became the signature. And even now, the worst part is simple. Someone was there that night. Someone left in the morning. And nobody ever proved who it was. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, something happened at Hinterkaifeck. Investigators believe family members were lured one by one into the barn. There, They were attacked, one after another, silenced before they could warn the others. Days passed. No one heard from the family. No calls back. No messages answered. At first, people thought they were busy. Then that feeling changed. Fast. Neighbors started talking. The gate stayed shut. The yard looked wrong. Too still. Too empty. The kind of empty that makes your stomach tighten. By then, someone had to check. A few villagers walked up the farm path. Nobody joked. Nobody rushed. They just kept looking at the windows, hoping to see movement. There was none. The courtyard was empty. No voices, no footsteps, no kids running around. Even the dogs were gone quiet. Then they reached the barn. The doors were closed, not locked, just shut. One of the neighbors put a hand on the wood and pushed. It opened slowly. Inside, the smell hit first. Old hay, dirt, something far worse underneath. Then they saw the bodies. Everything stopped right there. Nobody moved for a second. Nobody spoke. People just stared, trying to understand what they were looking at. Then came the part that made this case turn cold. The barn was not the only thing investigators noticed. The whole farm had signs of life. After the killings. Not before. After. Food had been made. Not much. Just enough to show someone had used the kitchen. Plates were out. Pots were warm at some point. A cup sat on the counter like someone had just set it down. The animals had been fed too. Water troughs were full. Feed was fresh. Doors had been opened and closed. Someone knew the routine. Someone kept it going. And then there was the chimney. Smoke had reportedly come from it. That detail changed everything. Because it meant someone stayed there. Not for an hour. Not for a quick look around. For days. Days spent on that farm, after the family was already dead. Investigators went over every room again. They checked footprints. They checked dirt patterns. They checked food, ash, tools, bedding, everything. And the same question kept coming back. Who was still there? Was it the killer or someone else? Maybe both. The idea made officers pause, because if the killer stayed behind, it meant something darker than escape. It meant comfort, control, confidence. It meant the person who did this did not panic, did not flee, did not break. They stayed, living in the same place where the family had died, sleeping there, eating there, feeding animals there, moving through the house like it still belonged to them. That is what scared investigators most. Not just the murders, not just the bodies in the barn. It was the calm after, the order, the routine, the fact that someone could look at death and keep going like nothing had happened. By the time police finished their first sweep, the farm no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied. And that changed the whole case. Because now, investigators were not only searching for a killer, they were searching for someone who had already proven they could remain right there, breathing the same air, walking the same floorboards, waiting in plain sight. The most unsettling part was simple. Whoever did this did not leave when it was over. They stayed long enough to make the farm look alive again. Authorities opened a full-scale investigation. They pulled every file they had, every photo, every statement, every scrap of paper. At first, it looked simple. Then it got messy fast. Hundreds of names went onto the list. Neighbors, travelers, former workers, old acquaintances, family friends, people who had passed through the area, people who had argued with the victims, people who had no clear reason to be there at all. Footsteps were compared. Every lead seemed promising for a day. Then it broke apart. Some suspects were cleared quickly. Others stayed under suspicion for years. Some remembered details too late, and some remembered too much, but nothing stuck. No fingerprints gave a clean match. No witness could point to one person with certainty. No weapon was recovered that could close the case. No confession ever came. The investigators kept going anyway. They spread out old photographs on tables. They studied faces for hours. They stared at notes written long ago by officers who were already retired or dead. They rechecked the scene. They checked the scene again. Then they checked it once more. The more they looked, the stranger it felt. There was no sign of robbery. Money was still there. Valuables were still there. Things that should have been taken were untouched. That changed everything. If theft was not the reason, then what was? That question sat at the center of the case. Was it revenge? A personal fight? A secret nobody ever admitted? A grudge buried for years? Or something else entirely? The evidence never gave a clear answer. That made the case harder, not easier. When crimes are about money, people can be traced. When they are about power, people talk. But when something feels personal and private, the trail gets thin fast. And this one felt personal. The victims were not left with the signs of a random break-in. Nothing suggested a quick theft gone wrong. The scene suggested someone knew where to go. Someone knew when to move. Someone knew what they were doing. But knowing that did not solve anything. It only widened the search. Investigators checked distant relatives. They checked old coworkers. They checked people who had moved away years before. They checked anyone who had once been linked to the property, even loosely. Some names appeared again and again in the files, then disappeared, then came back later under a different angle. Each time the hope was the same. This would be the one. This would connect the dots. It never happened. As years passed, the case changed shape. The first officers aged out. New detectives came in. New theories replaced old ones. New teams inherited the same boxes, the same photos, the same unanswered questions. The witnesses got older too. Some died. Some forgot. Some changed what they said. Some stayed silent forever. And with every passing year, the distance grew. Evidence vanished in the usual way cold cases do. Papers got lost. Items got damaged. Memories faded. Small mistakes became big problems. A detail that might have mattered in the first week became almost impossible to use after 20 years. Still, the case would not die. It kept pulling people back. Maybe because it made no sense. Maybe because it refused to fit the usual pattern. Maybe because there was something in the file that felt unfinished. No clear motive. No clear suspect. No clean answer. That is what made it so hard to let go. And that is why investigators kept staring at the same question for years. Why? Not how. Not who, at least not yet. Why would someone do this? Robbery did not fit. The money stayed behind. The valuables stayed behind. Nothing about it looked rushed enough for theft. So the theory kept circling back to the same place. The case only grew colder, not clearer. And even after decades, that one missing answer still sat there, untouched. Authorities launched a major investigation. Hundreds of suspects were considered. But no evidence proved who committed the murders. Years passed. Then, decades. Witnesses died. Evidence disappeared. The case grew colder. More than 100 years later. And this case still sits there, cold. Open. Unanswered. The Hinterkaifeck murders are still one of Europe's biggest unsolved crimes. 6 victims, 1 farm, and a list of questions nobody can close. Who made those footprints leading to the house? Who was hiding in the attic? Who stayed on that property after the killings? And why was the killer never found? That's the part that gets me. It's not just the crime. It's how many strange details surround it. The neighbors heard things. The family noticed signs. Something felt wrong long before the murders happened. But nobody stopped it. Nobody saw the full picture in time. Maybe the answer vanished with the years. Maybe the person who knew the truth took it to the grave. Or maybe the truth was always there, and nobody wanted to say it out loud. The farm is gone now. The building was torn down long ago. But the story stayed behind. People still talk about it because it doesn't feel finished. It doesn't feel clean. It feels like a door was opened. Something walked in, and then the door was left that way. That's why this case still bothers people today. Not because it's old, because it's quiet. Because there was no final answer. No confession. No clear ending. Just a rural place in Germany. A family that never got justice. And a mystery that keeps pulling people back in. And maybe that's the real problem. Sometimes the scariest cases are not the loud ones. They're the ones that almost make sense. The clues are there. The timeline is there. The fear is there. But the final piece never arrives. So what do you think happened at Hinterkaifeck? Was it someone the family knew? Was it a stranger watching for days? Was there something hidden on that farm no one noticed? Drop your theory in the comments and follow the Hidden Archives for more real mysteries buried in history.